So let's bring in Dan Sodergren, who's a technology and social media commentator who's been watching this with us. Thanks for staying with us. What's your reaction to what the Prime Minister has announced?
Well, I don't always agree with Keir Starmer, but he's absolutely right here. I feel for the last generation, or the next generation, or my daughter's generation, and I think he's absolutely right. There should be no compromise here. The irony, of course, being is that as social media, I mean, this kind of idea should have been happening 8 years ago. We knew about social media then. It took the past government maybe something like 8 years to try to do it, and they're now trying to do this in 8 months. So you have to applaud that kind of speed. But we've also got to think about the future. And I talk about the future in AI and the future of work and that kind of stuff. I'm a futurist. So the reality is that young people aren't necessarily using as much social media, certainly not Facebook, etc. But what they are using is things like gaming. So I absolutely applaud that gaming is brought into this because it isn't always. And so that's great news. But we have to start thinking about artificial intelligence as well. We've got to start thinking about the future and actually some of those things around data and artificial intelligence and strange things that people might not even be thinking about. But this next generation are starting to have things like relationships with artificial intelligence, and some pretty weird things are starting to happen. So I think we've got to be really careful here that we don't just say social media, we actually say online, including things like ChatGPT and OpenAI and other ones, of course, are available like Anthropic, etc. But all of them have all got to start thinking, how do we make sure that AI and online experiences for young people aren't doing things that are really damaging their mental health? And that's obviously one of the big things the government's saying here is that they believe that social media has been doing so.
Yeah.
But as the cliche is, the best time to plant a tree was 10 years ago, but the next best time is now. So at least they're doing it now.
And we've had, just in the last few minutes, a reaction from YouTube saying that UK's social media ban could push children to less safe services. So there clearly is going to be some kind of pushback from the big tech companies. What do you say to that point that they say it could make them less safe?
Well, again, this is what you would say, though, isn't it? This is the point. I mean, YouTube, no disrespect to YouTube, it is owned by Google. Google's one of the people that would be slightly affected. I actually don't think that YouTube will be massively affected by this, because I think under a different proviso, things like YouTube for Kids, the Prime Minister rightly mentioned, and other things, means that YouTube is an area where they'll be able to go on. And of course, that should be age verified anyway. Of course, it should be. Just like if you're watching a movie and it's an 18 movie, right? It's the same kind of principle. So I'm quite surprised that YouTube have come out and said that. But I do know that they are very concerned about kind of losing the next generation to something else. So maybe they're being a bit preemptive. But I think this is much more to do with things like Snapchat and Facebook and things like TikTok. And yes, I think you'll get a huge backlash. It'll be interesting to see if that backlash comes even as high up as President Trump, because of course he will be thinking about how much money these American companies make and how important they are to the American economy. So it'll be interesting to see what Keir Starmer says if President Trump does what he might do, which is be really quite almost vitriol about his dislike of this. But of course, American politics is about the free markets and making as much money as possible, no matter what. Of course, that's in their interest. But of course, for the UK, we've got to think about our values and protecting our children and making sure that American companies aren't just making lots of money from it. If you remember, I'm old enough to remember when, the smoking ban came in and people were appalled by the idea that young people couldn't really smoke. And I think that, the cigarette companies then had a huge amount of lobbying power. But you'll notice now the generational change has happened. And to be fair, we all now know that was a bit of a mistake. So it could be the fact that social media is then kind of seen as the next generation smoking, as it was for mine. I'm not saying it is as addictive as smoking, but I think the evidence out there is kind of proving that it's not good for you and it can be quite addictive too.
And the Prime Minister was at pains to say that the enforcement will be on the platforms and not on the children who might be trying to get round it.
Well, and rightly so. It's exactly the same principle, isn't it? You don't find the child who goes into a shop and tries to buy cigarettes underage. That would be insane. You don't find the child who's trying to get around the rules so they can drink alcohol earlier than they should do, because, of course, that would be insane and actually grossly unfair. And so, yes, this has to go on to the big tech companies, those people who are making money from this. Also, you've got to remember, or you might not know, but I think we all do know, the infinite scroll and these mechanisms they created were actually, this is a business decision they made. In tech, we famously say it's the race to the bottom of the brainstem. Like, this was actually done on purpose. They made these things like this so that young people and older generations too, every human being, kind of got addicted to them, because that's how you make money. You make money from eyeballs being on your platform and people being on there as long as possible. And so, let's be fair, they've made billions of pounds from this, and therefore I think this is about time they start, putting some of that into research and development and working out how they solve this problem. Which now, because they've got things like artificial intelligence and some very clever tech behind it, as Keir Starmer rightly says, they have the ability to innovate and to come up with some great solutions, things that we might not even have known or even think about right now, because they have huge budgets. And I think that's where they should be putting some of their profits into, is to start to protect children online.
And do you think that the cultural change will happen quite quickly once there is a ban in place? Do you think that that's something that might, change the way social media is within the country?
Well, you can't. I mean, one of the things about culture is culture takes a long time to change, doesn't it? Human beings take quite a long time to change, but culture takes a huge amount of time to change. Technology moves so quickly, and that's the problem, of course. Technology moves quicker than society does, and that's why we're into this thing called the fifth industrial revolution. And there are a lot of backlash moments because of artificial intelligence, social media, and mobile phones, etc. So I think the cultural change, I'm hoping the cultural change comes quickly, but we have to be realistic here that it's not likely to be. However, as Keir Starmer rightly says, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't start doing that hard work now. The cultural change might take a couple of years, it might take 5, but let's be fair, if we're thinking about this, we're most probably thinking about the child who's 8 or 9 or 10 now. We're not thinking about the child who's 15, because it's going to take quite a long time for the law to come in, and therefore actually the horses unfortunately bolted. Which is why I say I feel for that generation. Not only have they had to go through COVID and some other things that those huge, but they've now got to deal with this too.
Dan Sodergren, thank you very much indeed for your analysis.